Hey everybody, what's up? Let's talk John Calvin today, shall we? I've done a couple videos before in the past about where to start with Jonathan Edwards because there's just so much to read from Jonathan Edwards. But hey man, I'm Presbyterian. I should talk about Calvin every once in a while too, shouldn't I? Why should the Congregationalist American get all the love on this channel, whereas a good Presbyterian should love him some John Calvin, right? So in this short video, what I'd like to do is give you a very brief introduction to some of his more important works, including some that are very, very readable. And hey, I'll show you a few of the things that I have right here on my desk, and I'll even post some links in the description of this video. So you can toggle right over to Amazon.com and grab yourself whatever it is that I'm talking about in this short video. So if you're new to my channel, my name is Matt. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship, PCA, where we are a Reformed church just north of Pittsburgh. We are in business, by the way, even though it's pandemic time. It's coronavirus season, and a lot of churches are closed, but not us, man. We've been open. We are meeting on the Lord's Day, 3 services, 8:30, 11, and now 4 o'clock p.m. If you're anywhere north of Pittsburgh, please come check us out, Gospel Fellowship, PCA. All right, so, when I talked about Edwards, one of the things I said is you got to give yourself some success. You got to give yourself some credit. Do a few things that are easy to check off. Read those first. Get yourself some momentum before you get into the harder works. And I'm going to say the same thing here in this video about Calvin as I did with Edwards. Let me mention this one right off the top here. This is a little book on the Christian life. That's actually the title. And as you can see, it lives up to the name. It is a little book, and it is on the Christian life, and it is by John Calvin, one of the more beautiful, easy, and succinct works that Calvin did, describing what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and to follow faithfully after him in this world. Now, I should mention, too, that there's this thing going on that you could be a part of right now. If you happen to be watching this as I'm posting it, so I'm posting this in early February of 2021, there's a thing called the Paideia Theological Center, and basically what this is theological reading groups all over the country. It started at RTS, Reformed Theological Seminary, but it spread quickly to many other seminaries. And basically they choose one book and people all over the world read it, and they meet together in reading groups. And that's the kind of the Paideia concept. The word means instruction or basic discipleship. And this is the book that they're reading right now. So you could actually get involved in this, the Paideia Learning Center, and read through John Calvin's A Little Book on the Christian Life. It's only 100 pages and very, very helpful. I think you're going to find it easily readable and totally relevant and applicable to your Christian life. Now, normally, before I dig into a theologian really, really hardcore in terms of reading some of his more important works, I like to read a good biography of him, and I like to get a little bit about what he believed. And so the next 2 books I'm going to recommend are going to do that. This is one of the classic biographies of Calvin. It's called A Portrait of John Calvin. This cover's kind of a special edition cover, but you can find T.H.L. Parker's basic biography of John Calvin. Again, this is only 120 pages, and if you're looking for the basic background of his life, who he is, how he was converted, how the Lord used him in the Reformation movement, that would probably be a pretty good introduction. There are much longer biographies, of course. There's some really long biographies on Calvin because there's so much out there about Calvin. His life was so incredibly important to the Reformation movement. But this one by T.H.L. Parker is about as good as it's going to get in terms of a short biography. Now, this series here, the Armchair Theologian series, is really cool. And despite the fact that there are cartoons on the covers of these books, they're actually pretty well done. I've got a few of them. And basically what this does is it introduces a theologian's life and his main ideas to the lay audience. So these are not written for technical experts. So if you're not a technical expert on Calvin, this is going to be perfect for you. And believe it or not, it has a ton of illustrations to try to help the reader understand the concepts that are being described. Sometimes things can be a little bit esoteric. Sometimes things can be a little ethereal. Concepts can be pretty heady as far as understanding what the author's even talking about, especially if it's from a different era, different genre, different background, whole different Sitz and Leben from your life. And so these drawings are actually really, really helpful, and the writing is quite clear and crisp in this series. There's several others. But this one is by Christopher Elwood, illustrations by Ron Hill. One trigger warning on this book, though, If you're pretty into the second commandment and you believe any illustration depicting the three persons of the Trinity is a violation of the same, you might find that offensive because sometimes it does use ideas of God in pictorial form, and so I wouldn't want you to get into something that your conscience wouldn't allow. Okay? Next, I want to recommend to you Calvin's commentaries, and I have the whole huge set of them up on my shelf up there. It's about as big as a basketball player's wingspan. Because Calvin wrote tons and tons of information on practically every book of the Bible, not all the books of the Bible, but his commentaries are still some of the most fantastic, in-depth, and helpful original source biblical commentary stuff you can get out there. Now, of course, it's all online too. And one of the reasons why I actually suggest to get into this a little bit earlier is that this is going to give you a taste for Calvin's pastoral side and his readability in terms of his exegetical skill. So when Calvin comes to any biblical text, whether it's Old Testament, New Testament, prophets, epistles, Acts, Gospels, whatever it is, Calvin comes with a very clear mind, a definite love for the church, a real devotional feel to it, entire applicability to the believer's life, and just razor sharp insight into the text itself in Greek and Hebrew. You don't have to be a technical scholar to read Calvin's commentaries. Do not think that. Do not be intimidated by them. Now, he often has more to say than you care to learn, which is okay, because most of what he does is very detailed and very excellent. But you're gonna be surprised, because if you thought Calvin was some sort of an ivory tower theologian, constantly using big terms and words that you've never heard of, ideas that are way beyond your general level of apprehension, you're going to be surprised to find out exactly how readable Calvin's commentaries are. They're incredibly readable, incredibly helpful, and very, very faithful to the text. So I recommend his commentaries. And again, what's nice about the commentaries is you don't have to commit 3 years to reading them. What you do is you'll look up any one passage you're talking about or you're studying or you're thinking about lately and just see what Calvin has to say. You're going to be surprised. You know, a lot of people think that Calvin is just constantly talking about predestination. That's the one thing they know about John Calvin. But believe me when I tell you this, if you get into his works at all, you're going to find that stereotype of the cold, sterile, predestination only preaching a theologian, you're going to find that stereotype to be shattered. As a man, Calvin was who truly loved the Lord, who truly saw the dangers that were facing the church in his day, who truly preached towards a heartfelt piety. After all, remember Calvin's personal motto was, "I offer my heart to you promptly and sincerely," and that comes across in all of his writings, including his commentaries. Now, of course, Calvin preaches on predestination. Of course, he's known for that, but so did Luther, so did Augustine, so did the Puritans. Calvin is not alone in his doctrine of predestination. And so that's going to bring us then to the final and most important work that you might want to consider, and that is, of course, his Institutes of the Christian Religion. Now, I have 2 copies of them here. This is the one that it took me several years to read through. This is my duct-taped edition, the Henry Beveridge translation. A little bit of an older translation, but still very good. There's also one by Battles. And this is a newer edition of the same book, the Institutes of the Christian Religion, in hardback. And this one's a little bit nicer if you're looking on Amazon, because the font is much more readable in this one than in the old paperback, same translator. Now, when I read through the Institutes, I'll have to admit that I did it about 2 pages at a time. In fact, it took me more than a year, I think it was, to read through the whole of the Institutes, because it is pretty in-depth. But once again, you're going to find the stereotype that's all about predestination completely blown to bits. In fact, the Institutes moves through Christian doctrine in 4 parts. Part 1 is basically about God as creator and Lord. So it's a theology. It's about the Trinity. It's about the sovereignty of God, his control, his lordship, his attributes. Part 2, or Book 2 it's called, is about Christ as our Redeemer, and Calvin labors to show how Christ is revealed in the law, but then also in the Gospel in the New Testament. Part 3 has to do with our redemption, and this is where he begins talking about things like regeneration, faith, justification, sanctification, and yes, finally, predestination. Now, just to prove my point that Calvin's not just about predestination all the time, I have my little tabby here tabbed in to where he finally mentions it in book 3. Okay, so you got all this meat over here on this side before you even get to the mention of predestination. So don't go telling me that that's all Calvin ever talked about, because it's just not true. He's got all kinds of things in here. In fact, let me just recommend, if you want to sample the Institutes, I'm going to recommend a section to you that is going to blow your socks off. You're going to love this. Go to book 3 and read chapters 8 and 9. 2 chapters are not very long. Okay, you could probably do each one in one sitting, no problem. Chapter 8 is called Of Bearing the Cross, One Branch of Self-Denial. Focusing on that passage where Christ tells us that we are to take up our cross and to follow him. And the next one right after that is on meditating on the future life. Again, a great challenge to trusting and hoping in Christ's grace, even as he brings peace into our lives through faith. Very, very pastoral. You're going to love those 2 sections. Give them a taste test and tell me if I'm wrong. All right, so I think Calvin, you're going to find, actually blows away the stereotypes. He loved Jesus. You can clearly see that in his writings. He loved the church. He greatly sought the good, the unity of the church. He defended against the errors and the threats that he saw in his day. There is quite a bit of anti-Roman Catholicism or polemical theology in there too. But there's even one edition of the Institutes. I didn't pull it down off the shelf, but I have it, in which just the positive teachings, not so much the polemics, are given, and it's a very greatly reduced edition of the Institutes. I'm thinking it's like Osborne and something. Lane and Osborne maybe are the editors of that particular edition. That'd be the shortest edition of the Institutes that you can possibly find. Okay. I guess I'll just conclude it this way by saying, you know, when you go back to the Reformation of the 500s, you got some really important people there. Obviously, Luther is incredibly important with the doctrine of justification by faith. Luther, though, is kind of like a bull in a china shop. He never really wrote a systematic theology. He was just constantly responding to burning fires, putting out fires, the threat of banishment and excommunication from the church, etc. Luther's charging through issues like the Lord's Supper, getting in conflict with even others that should have been his friends, like Zwingli. But Calvin comes along, and although they're contemporaries, Calvin's actually a little bit later and has the opportunity to systematize the teaching of the Reformation movement, the Protestant movement, and to put it together into its first and most important work of systematic theology. And again, that is the Institutes of the Christian Religion, a monumental work, easily one of the top five most important books in Christian history, outside of course, Scripture. With books like St. Augustine's The Confessions and several others aside, I don't think anybody would, hold on, decline that message since I'm 13 minutes into this video and I don't want to redo it. Easily one of the most important books in Christian history, probably one you're going to want to read at some point in your life. All right. Hey, thanks for checking in. I will put these books in the description of this video as links to Amazon. Thank you so much. Do love you lots. Tell me what you think about Calvin in the comment section of this video, and we will talk to you later.